Out of the ashes. Good morning. It's Monday, June the 22nd, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. I created this podcast to answer the question asked by conservatives, namely, what can I do? My podcast is short, approximately 5 to 10 minutes long, except today it'll be running a little bit longer because I have extra material. And I usually keep it short because shorter podcasts are easier to download and listen to. I've been listening to conservative talk radio since 1989. I've grown up in a socialist household and learned the tricks of socialism. My podcast is made available through Spreaker and can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. Today, what can I do? Quote of the day, stress, debunking Howard Zinn, government against itself, and out of the ashes. All that when I come back. Thank you. What can I do? Beware of foundation building by the left. Last episode explained that the myth of President Trump's popular vote loss was simply a way for the left to create a foundation to legitimize attacks on his presidency. Now, beware Black Lives Matter, quote unquote. This too is an attempt to create a foundation to legitimize mischief. Do not be fooled. The dynamic works like this. Don't Black Lives Matter? Well, yes. Then reparations. Uh-oh. Do Black Lives Matter? Of course. Then single-payer health care. Wait a minute. Do Black Lives Matter? Certainly. Then socialism. Oops. Didn't see that coming. By that time, you're fucked. Once you concede the foundation, then you concede everything that is built upon it. Think about it. Faux conservatives are stupid and make stupid mistakes. Be a true conservative and be smart. Next up, the quote of the day. Thank you. The quote of the day comes from dailyscripture.net. Quote, "Let me love you, my Lord and my God, and see myself as I really am, a pilgrim in this world, a Christian called to respect and love all whose lives I touch, those in authority over me or those under my authority, my friends and my enemies. Help me to conquer anger with gentleness, greed by generosity, apathy by fervor. Help me to forget myself and reach out towards others." Unquote. Amen. Up next, stress. Thank you very much. And stress. The last few weeks have been very, very stressful for everybody. And some of the ways that I want to talk about, a couple of ways that you can deal with the stress of the news, of what's going on in the news. So the number one way to deal with this is to remember and be cognizant of the fact that there's a huge disconnect going on right now. There are people, Rush Limbaugh in particular, that says that we're on the verge of a civil war. Glenn Beck is also big on this idea. And yet, and they're basing this on what they see in the news. And yet, when I go out, and I'm out every single day, 7 days a week, I'm out and about. I'm doing my work. I work 7 days a week. I'm out and making deliveries, talking to people. I'm in traffic, etc., and I experience no such thing. There's no such tension. There's no, you don't have people that are walking around with knives or guns or whatever ready to shoot or kill people. Nobody is talking to each other through clenched teeth. Quite the opposite. Everybody seems relaxed. They seem generally in a good mood. They seem to be really happy about the fact that a lot of the restrictions on businesses are being lifted. And so they seem to be in a particularly good mood about that. And so it's a completely different world from what's being shown on television. If there's going to be a civil war, it seems to me it's going to be between the news networks, CNN versus Fox or something like that. Or maybe there'll be some kind of fisticuffs on the House or Senate floor. But as for the rest of the country, if the rest of the country is like where I am, and I live in California, so there have been some riots, but they took place in very liberal enclaves and very specific places, and the vast majority of the places, the cities and whatnot in Southern California haven't been touched by them. I live in a section of Southern California in which I've seen, on two occasions I've seen protesters. On one place, it was on two corners of an intersection, and they numbered 12. And they had signs, and they were chanting. And then the other time, it was one person. A few days later, at a different intersection, one person with a sign. So, again, all this talk about, that they were on the verge of a civil war, and terrible things are happening in this country, and we need to do something quick, are overblown, are absolutely overblown. I'm sure that your experiences pretty much match mine. The other way to deal with the stress, because all the stress now is coming from right-wing pundits and news broadcasts. So that being the case, and it happens to me, like right over the past few weeks, I've had to turn off Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Hugh Hewitt, Glenn Beck. I have to turn them off. I can't deal with it. I can't deal with the constant. Normally, I would be able to listen to them all day long. I go from Hugh Hewitt to Glenn Beck to Rush Limbaugh to Sean Hannity, and end up with, again, that guy in New York whose name I can never remember, but all day I'm listening to it, and it works out. But now I can't listen to anybody. I just can't listen to anybody. The hysteria, and all of them are complaining and whining and pointing things out. None of them are providing any type of relief or any type of suggestions as what to do about situations. So that means I just I turn them off. I listen to them as much as I can, but within a short period of time, maybe with 5 minutes, forget it. I got to turn it off and listen to music. So that's what I suggest to you as well. You get overloaded, turn us off. Turn me off too. If you get to that point where you're just you've had enough, don't feel like you have to be some kind of a martyr and listen to the radio no matter what. Don't be afraid to cut it short, turn it off, take a break. If you got to take a break for a few days or a few weeks, it's better in the long run than trying to force yourself to listen to things. And the other thing that happens to me is that I end up being, it affects my mood and it affects my personality to sit and listen to this stuff. I become it's harder for me to live with me. And it's much more difficult for me to be polite and happy and whatnot. So I just have to cut it off. And I'm telling you the same thing. If you have to, cut it off. Listen to music for a while until things calm down to the point where you can go back and listen to them. So for the long run, don't be afraid to cut things off. So next up, debunking Howard Zinn. Thank you. I've heard from Rush Limbaugh's statements and questions about our educational system with regards to recent subversive activities like pulling down statues of American historical figures. The foundation for all this activity is a textbook, and it's titled A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. The book that I'm about to read from explains and refutes this history book. So, Here we go. Let's see. There we go, right there. And there it is, called Debunking Howard Zinn by Mary Grabar. And we're starting off here with what's called a note from the author. There is no historian like Howard Zinn. His cultish following continues to grow nearly 40 years after the publication of his A People's History of the United States, the nation's best-selling American history survey book as both a trade book and textbook. A People's History is more than another left-wing interpretation of American history. Long before it appeared on bookshelves, in 1980, historians were writing American history from a liberal, leftist, and even Marxist perspective. In fact, Zinn leans on these histories for much of his material. But their names have largely been forgotten, and Zinn's stature grows. Certainly no other history book has taken the place of the Bible at the swearing-in of an elected official. But in April 2019, A People's History was the sacred object on which newly elected Oklahoma City Council member Jo Beth Hammond chose to place her hand for her oath of office. Similarly, it is doubtful that a district attorney ever cited any other historian's autobiography in her maiden speech, as Natasha Irving of Waldoboro, Maine did in January 2019 when she referred to Zinn's "You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train." She said that she could not be, quote, neutral in the face of mass incarceration, in the face of prosecution of the sick for being sick, the poor for being poor, unquote. Nearly a decade after Zinn's death, a new generation of readers is picking up his book and experiencing the feeling their parents felt in the 1980s and 1990s of having the wool pulled away from their eyes. These members of Generation Z seem undisturbed by Zinn's use of archaic 1960s lingo like the establishment and the system. They identify with the oft-mentioned struggle, a staple of communist writing. In an age of racial hypersensitivity, no one seems bothered by Zinn's continual references to, quote, Negroes, unquote, a term that has been considered offensive since the 1960s. Zinn is often blamed for the decline in history writing, teaching, and knowledge. Conscientious historians seek to replicate the appeal of Zinn's book while presenting a more balanced and positive view of American history. Thus, a recent Wall Street Journal column about Land of Hope, a new book by Wilfred McClay, is titled, quote, Reclaiming History from Howard Zinn, unquote. Previous attempts to provide an appealing corrective include William J. Bennett's 3-volume America, The Last Best Hope in 2006, and in 2004, Larry Schweikart's and Michael Allen's A Patriot's History of the United States. Historians on the left, too, present their books as more respectable alternatives to Zinn. Harvard history professor Jill Lepore positioned her 2018 book, These Truths, A History of the United States, as a response not only to the American triumphalism of popular history, but also to Zinn's, quote, Marxist reckoning with American atrocity, unquote. Before that was Eric Foner's The Story of American Freedom, published in 1996. Neither such books nor the many critical assessments of a people's history seem to have decreased the book's popularity. In fact, controversies only increase sales for the, quote, evergreen, unquote, title that sells, quote, incredibly well, unquote, year after year. Stanford University education professor Sam Weinberg accounted for the book's preternatural shelf life by the fact that, quote, Zinn shrewdly recognized that what might have been common knowledge among subscribers to the Radical History Review was largely invisible to the broader reading public. It took Zinn's brilliance to draw a direct line from the rapier Columbus used to hack off the hands of the Arawaks to the rifles aimed by Andrew Johnson to give the Creek Nation no quarter, and to the 9,000-pound little boy that Paul Tibbets fatefully released over Hiroshima in August 1945, unquote. Actually, as will be demonstrated in the following pages, Columbus did not hack off the hands of the Arawaks with a rapier. Weinberg noted that a people's history is as radical in its rhetoric as it is in its politics. In fact, Zinn's rhetorical strategies are more than radical. They are fundamentally and grossly dishonest. Weinberg pointed out the unusual way Zinn used questions, not as the rare shoulder-shrugging admission of the historian's epistemological quandary, so much as devices that shock readers into considering the past anew. In one chapter, Weinberg counted 29 big-in-your-face questions presenting two stark choices. Such a rhetorical turn is almost never encountered in professional historical writing, says Weinberg. By presenting outrageous accusations against America as questions rather than assertions, Zinn attempts to evade responsibility for lying about American history. But he has, in fact, articulated these false claims and fixed them in his readers' minds. Take one example highlighted by Weinberg. In the World War II chapter of A People's History, Zinn asks, with the defeat of the Axis, were fascism's essential elements, militarism, racism, imperialism, now gone, or were they absorbed into the already poisoned bones of the victors? Here, Zinn is suggesting the United States is the moral equivalent of Hitler's Germany, but by asking a question instead of stating a claim, Zinn has cleverly indemnified himself against the charge that he's making Americans out to be as bad as the Nazis. And no wonder, the proposition is as absurd as it is offensive. And yet, with dozens of such outlandish suggestions and countless other grossly dishonest rhetorical tricks on nearly every page of A People's History, Howard Zinn has succeeded in convincing a generation of Americans that the nation Abraham Lincoln truly called the last best hope of earth is essentially a racist, criminal enterprise built on murdering Indians, exploiting slaves, and oppressing the working man. It obviously needs to be replaced by something better. And of course, Zinn has the answer: a classless, egalitarian society. Yes, what Zinn is selling is the very same communist utopian fantasy that killed more than 100 million human beings in the 20th century. The dream lives on, though, for the young and the uninformed. Zinn is particularly appealing to adolescents who are typically dissatisfied with their elders, believing themselves to be wiser. Many adults look back at this phase of their life as David Greenberg, writing in the March 19, 2013 New Republic, did as he reflected on his own adolescent rebelliousness. As a 16-year-old, when he thrilled to Zinn's deflation of what he presented as the myths of standard issue history. And now, let me go. I was going to stop there, but let me go ahead and go on with that. Let's see. Zinn whispered that everything... Okay, here it is. Zinn had mischievously and subversively whispered that everything I'd learned in school was a sugar-coated fairy tale, if not a deliberate lie. Weinberg's diagnosis is along the same lines. A People's History speaks directly to our inner Holden Caulfield. Our heroes are shameless frauds, our parents and teachers conniving liars, our textbooks propagandistic slop. They're all phonies, is a message that never goes out of style. Zinn whispers that the elders have lied about communism as they have about everything else, and young people are buying it. In October 2018, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation reported that 52% of millennials surveyed would prefer to live in a socialist or communist country. Only 40% preferred a capitalist country. A 2018 Gallup poll revealed that only 45% of Americans aged 18 to 29 held a positive view of capitalism, marking a disturbing trend. As recently as 2010, 68% had viewed capitalism positively. Zinn's propaganda has been most spectacularly effective. His dishonest American history is not the only factor in Americans turning away from their heritage of freedom toward communist fantasies. But Howard Zinn has been instrumental in this destructive transformation. The task I undertake in this book is to expose Zinn's lies. The United States of America, still the last best hope, deserves better than slanders. She deserves our respect and gratitude and the truth about her history. And that's Mary Grabar, the author. And a couple of things that I wanted to note. Number one, that he was able to write this book because of one reason, that there was, back in the day, the left made the argument that the right swallowed and agreed with and shouldn't have agreed with. And that is that there really is no such thing as history or history books. That history really is nothing more than political propaganda. And when the right in this country went along with that notion, that opens the floodgates. Anything goes. So Howard Zinn is able to write this book of people's history and get it accepted by school districts all across the country as a textbook. Okay, so this is, again, it's foundation building. And I've said something about that earlier in this broadcast or this podcast, that beware foundation building. The left will make these little statements that at first don't sound, too far-fetched. If they say, well, there's really no history, it's all basically political propaganda, well, I can kind of see that. But reflexively, you need to say no. You need to argue with it. No, 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 until evidence and proof is presented. Okay, but things are not to be accepted as true until proven false. They have to be proven true. Then you can argue possibly with the evidence or the proof that's submitted. But that's the way it works. It's one of the oldest fallacies in the book, is that something is true until proven false. It's not my job to prove anything false. It's called proving a negative. And so the other thing is that as far as kids are concerned and wanting to, thinking their parents as fuddy-duddies or whatever, and liars and whatnot, a lot of that falls on the parents. That got started in the mid-60s and 70s when the style of parenting went from being a parent, which means being a disciplinarian and making sure that you're in charge of your children, making sure they do what they need to do, when they need to do it, how they need to do it. Get up in the morning, have breakfast, go to school, have lunch, make sure they're well-dressed, well-fed, etc., and make sure when they come home they do their homework. You're the boss. That's what a parent is, more or less a boss, because your job to get your kid to the age of 18 safely and with knowledge enough so that they can live as functioning adults. But in the 60s, the left said, no. You don't want to be a parent, you want to be a friend. Be a friend to your children. And the reason they got away with this is because of the horrifying images we were seeing on television in the 60s of runaway teenagers that were going to Haight-Ashbury, dropping acid, and then diving out of second and third floor windows and hurting or killing themselves. And so parents were just horrified. They were terrified that their children would be next, that their children would be lured to their doom by these Pied Pipers of insanity. And so they wanted to know what to do, and a lot of writers jumped right into it and started writing books, how to be a better parent. And the message was always, don't be a parent, be a friend. And that's crap. You've got to be a parent. Okay, so let's see. What's next here? I believe it is Out of the Ashes. Let me see what's going on. No, it's Government Against Itself in a minute. Thank you. Now I'm going to read the last, some of the last chapter of Government Against Itself, and it is a book written by Daniel DeSalvo, and it is the Public Union Power and Its Consequences. And this is from chapter 10. The title of it is a question, A Day of Reckoning? My central claim in this book is that unionization and collective bargaining in state and local government impose significant costs on society while providing few broadly shared benefits. The costs are primarily borne by taxpayers who fund government services and citizens who rely on them, while the benefits accrue overwhelmingly to those who are public employees. Since the former greatly outnumber the latter, the case against government unions deserves a hearing. As this book has documented, the interests of public employees run afoul of the interests of the broader public in multiple instances. Still, it's worth reviewing the case for public sector unionism to see how well it holds up. The core claims of the pro-union position are that unionization, number one, ensures labor peace. Number two, enables industrial democracy. Number three, provides public employees representation in the political arena and offers a counterweight to business. 4, reduces the power inequalities between employers and workers. 5, improves government workers' lives by increasing salaries and benefits. 6, protects the fundamental right of collective bargaining. And 7, ensures investment in public goods. Before considering each claim, it should be noted that only 2 of the 8 claims, 1 and 7, imply that unionization and collective bargaining benefit society as a whole rather than public workers alone. Claims 2 through 6 relate to the benefits unionization gives to government employees. While there may be some beneficial side effects, for example, better paid public servants will have more disposable income and boost consumer spending during economic downturns, those effects are likely to be relatively weak, not least because public employment would perform this function without unionization. In short, defenders of public employee unions have yet to make a convincing case that these organizations, in fact, benefit the broader society. Businesses, too, are undoubtedly self-interested, but the market helps ensure their pursuit of their private interests yields public benefits in the form of innovative products, new jobs, and economic growth. Government workers' unions offer few, if any, such generalized benefits. At best, defenders of the unions argue that they provide a counterweight to conservatives and big business and have made government more productive in some areas, primarily by reducing turnover among workers. These arguments derive from the market economy, wherein private sector unions would make firms more efficient. Yet, in the public sector, where there are few market pressures, these arguments are weak reeds on which to hang the defense of unionization and collective bargaining. This is especially true if we recall that turnover in government employment tends to be lower than in the private sector, even when employees are not unionized. Moreover, some unions may even encourage turnover among younger employees if they are more protective of senior employees and push for better pay and benefits for them at the expense of more generous salaries for newly hired workers. In recent public debates, defenders of government unions have largely confined themselves to arguing that public employees are not overpaid, have not contributed to recent state budget deficits, are not responsible for the underfunding of public pension systems, and that such unions have smaller effects on compensation than those in the private sector. Yet these points amount to little more than denials that unions do harm and therefore shouldn't be challenged. None demonstrates that government unions provide concrete benefits to society at large. By extension, in the eyes of these authors, it would seem that the status quo of public sector labor relations where bargaining and unions exist cannot be improved to the benefit of the public, with the possible exception of introducing collective bargaining in states with weak legal provisions. Missing is a well-developed positive argument for public sector unions' broad social, economic, and political benefits. That case would require proving more than that public employees have a right to form associations on their own and engage in the political process. Defenders of unions must go further and justify the coercive aspects of public unionism, including the agency shop, dues check-off, and mandatory collective bargaining. These practices reduce the liberty and discretion of individual workers and government employers. In this respect, again, public sector unions are different from private sector ones. Defenders of private sector unions do argue, with considerable justice and some evidence on their side, that they benefit not only their members but also other similarly situated workers by inducing other companies to raise wages to avert unionization. 4/5 of workers are employed in the private sector, where there is greater means and motive to exploit workers, which bolsters the case for unionism. There is some evidence that unions have made companies more productive. That's an effect that benefits consumers and more broadly the economy. Strong private sector labor unions have also helped reduce economic inequality. Yet public sector unions fail to provide such wider gains, i.e. ones that benefit society as a whole. As sociologist Jake Rosenfield points out, threat effects are less likely to operate in the public sector where the government is the employer. Therefore, unionizing one group, say police officers or firefighters, does not raise the wages of non-union government employees or similarly situated employees in the private sector. Now let's turn to the individual arguments. Well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there. The thing that he's missing, he's kind of dancing around, is the fact that unions, public employee unions, are out and they're no good because they are essentially a conflict of interest. You can't work for two masters. You can't work for the government, i.e. the people, and work for a union at the same time. Any place that is unionized is the union is going to basically take over, like in police departments. And very often it is the unions that decide who their bosses are going to be. Who's going to be the next chief of police? Who's going to be the mayor? Who's going to sit on the city council? So that's corruption. It's conflict of interest. It's corrupt, and they have to go. What the author in this particular book is doing is looking at this pragmatically and looking at it and asking the question, do the ends justify the means? And then saying, no, it doesn't. Which is a further argument, but it's not the essential argument. And it's weak because every time you make a pragmatic objection, somebody is going to come up with a pragmatic solution. And when they do, you're screwed. So, up next, an excerpt from Out of the Ashes. Thank you very much. The next one, where is this bad boy? There he is, right there, by Anthony Esselin. I've read some of this before. It's Out of the Ashes, Rebuilding American Culture. And this is going to help to remind people the value of culture and how culture works as a support mechanism for our politics and political structure. I'm not talking about sprinkling sugar upon that history or slathering it with acid. All nations bear the mark of mankind. We are fools and sinners, and there will be plenty of time for children to learn that hard lesson, just as they will learn that there are times when mother is difficult and father inattentive, and that parents, too, can get things wrong. But it is the essence of piety to honor your father and mother because they are yours. And because they have given you a gift you can never recompense. This piety extends to the land of your birth, the rocks and hills, the templed hills, as the old patriotic anthem has it. The character of a nation is not to be found primarily in great political movements, and certainly not in an obsession with progress. It is found in its land and its weather, the kind of people who work there, the music they sing, the places where they worship, the games they play, the food they raise, and what they honor and love, and what they will shed their blood to save. The town hall suggests as much. It says to the citizen, this is your home too. Every child is born into a web of relationships extending far into the past. Other animals float along in the current of time. Man alone dwells in time and makes it his. He builds up a history. The word story comes from the Latin historia, and that is just as well. History for children is a grand story filled with stories, and the names and dates are important in the story for the same reason that you cannot make any sense out of a novel if you're always forgetting who is who and how old they are. For the last 100 years, educational innovators have been telling us that history is more than a matter of names and dates, as if anybody ever said it was. The result is that students don't know any of those names and dates, and because they have no cast of characters and no timeline, they can't tell any stories either. Bones alone do not a body make, but if you have no bones at all, you might be able to float in the water like a jellyfish. Schlup, schlup. But that is about it. If you look at an old town hall, it will occur to you at once that the place might house stories. Who is that august personage in the fading portrait? What is that document under the glass case? What names are on that memorial? When was that picture taken? The one where the men seem to be cutting a ribbon near a railroad track. When we are children, we want to hear about what things were like when our parents and grandparents were young. Is that not in itself remarkable? We fail to appreciate it only because it is as common as the blue sky above us. We are too accustomed to wonders. Why should a child care about the time when his grandfather, a young man, boasted to a recent Italian immigrant that he could order somebody's death and it would happen with a snap of the fingers? It wasn't true. It was all bluster meant to impress and fool the newcomer. But that is what my father's father did. It did not make my grandfather a great man, and it certainly did not make him a good man. But it made him human and helped me form a clear picture of him in my mind. I see him in the studio, photograph mounted behind glass and hung on the wall of their parlor. He's short, dark, lean, and glowering. He's wearing the uniform he wore when he served in the Army in World War I, the American Army. And I wonder what it was like for him, speaking broken English, to serve alongside Americans in a war waged on the other side of the ocean, and partly in Italy at that. And that's where I'm going to go ahead and leave this for right now, but this is an excellent book that I would highly recommend, and it's Anthony Esolen, and it's called Out of the Ashes, Reclaiming American Culture. Let's see here. Back in a minute. Who is a true conservative? He's the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He's the person that understands that cultural conservatism is more important than political conservatism. He's not selfish, but minds his own business. He acts like an adult. He's patriotic and uses common sense. He expresses what he knows and does so with certainty. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he's better than the socialist. He is a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that. If you don't know with every fiber of your being that being a true conservative is best, then you're wasting your time. And that brings me to the end of another episode of The Drill. Remember, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and always ask yourself, what is real? How do I know? What do I do about it? I'm Ron, and that's The Drill.